Hello, I am Christopher Finley. This podcast is made possible by the LAPE program, and I am here with...
Hi, I'm Professor Bristin Jones, and this is Insert Research Here.
Perfect. Nice to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Christopher.
We have a lot we could talk about. So many questions. Would you like to start, your journey?
Sure.
Through schooling and research or anything like that?
Absolutely.
We could start at the end. We could start today, but we can
Let's start at the beginning.
All
Let's
right,
start at the beginning.
All right.
So my undergraduate career started at Stanford University. I graduated in 2007, and I had multiple opportunities while I was there to engage in undergraduate research. So that's one reason I'm so passionate about research today, is I actually got started as an undergrad myself. I had a great, sort of like a Spark class, but for us it was for sophomores, and it was on Spanish poetry, and I just really jived with the material, and after that experience, my professor encouraged me to do research, and so I ended up doing archival research in Madrid for a summer on Juan Ramon Jimenez, which is one of my favorite Spanish poets. And so that just gave me a lot of confidence it was actually my first time out of North America. I'd never traveled outside of Canada or the US before. I had a summer in Madrid, just immersed in these archives and poetry, and just ever since then I really haven't stopped. For my senior thesis project, I did an honors thesis, and for us we had to do sort of independent research for our honors thesis project. That research I conducted in Australia, and I did a lot of sort of informal interviews, sort of oral history angle about an environmental demographic movement that happened called Sea Change. And since then, I like to tell my students that the trajectory you have after undergrad is not always straightforward. So I'm a professor now, and I can sort of retrospectively make sense of how I got here, but I designed my own major in writing and environmental ethics. I knew I was sort of working at the intersection of the humanities, storytelling, and environmental studies, but that meant it wasn't clear where I went for grad school. I knew I wanted to do grad school. So I did 1 year of an environmental studies program at CU Boulder, and thinking of focusing sort of on environmental storytelling, but it just wasn't a great fit for me, that program. I dropped out of grad school. It was a really hard year. I didn't know what I was going to do, but luckily I found a program at the University of Bologna in Italy where I did sort of the equivalent of a master's. It's called a laurea magistrale, and that was in comparative literature. So slight change. I considered majoring in comparative literature as an undergrad, so I was like, it sounds cool. It's like different languages, different literatures, different cultures, and I've been in comparative literature ever since. So I loved that program. I was there for 4 years in Italy, continued to do research, had a sort of like a master's thesis project for that, about 200 pages, and then went on to do my PhD at Berkeley, where I continued in comparative literature, focusing on Italian and Latin American modern literatures with a focus on the field of what's called animal studies. So we have a sort of large umbrella of something called environmental humanities, which I'm sure will come up a little bit in our conversation today, but my dissertation research focused on how stories talk about the relationship between humans and other animals. So lots of different research projects to get to where I am today. And then one thing I love about being at UC Merced is that I have a lot of flexibility to pursue research that I'm interested in. So I always have multiple projects going at any one time, but I have research projects on the Sicilian Mafia and how we can fight it through environmental activism. I have projects on the environmental humanities in general, what are career trajectories for our students, and then other Latin American projects, which we may talk about today as well.
Mm-hmm. That is a lot. It's a lot of stuff. And I know you through also, how I came to be doing this LAPE project. You have your own LAPE project with students that is about cows and singing the cows milking songs. Could you talk about more about that project and more about how students can come to interact and be a part of that project in the next coming years? Or
Absolutely. Yeah. So LEAP is a really great opportunity. A lot of students haven't heard of it, and actually a lot of faculty haven't heard of it. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in doing undergraduate research, LEAP might be a possibility for students out there or even faculty. It's basically free money for students to do research. And faculty may already have a specific research project they're working on. That for me was the case. It was a project that was sort of in the back of my mind. I'd been so busy finishing my dissertation and getting on the job market that I sort of put that project on the back burner, but LEAP actually allowed me to make sure that at least once a week I'm connecting with my students about this project. So as you mentioned, my project is about Cantos Llaneros. So there's a geographical region in Colombia and Venezuela known as the Llanos. Llanos means plains. And it's a very unique ecosystem, both for humans and animals. And so I learned through my partner, who is Venezuelan. He knew that I worked on, storytelling, animals, human-animal communication. And he said, well, actually, there's this practice in Venezuela where I'm from where people sing to their cows. And it was recently nominated by UNESCO as cultural heritage in urgent need of safeguarding. And so I thought, well, this sounds exactly like the type of research I'm interested in. Let's see what research is being done. And I realized there actually was no research actively going on in the U.S. about this cultural practice. And so my hope is that I'll be able to go actually to Venezuela or Colombia someday and be more on the ground. But for the past 2 years here at UC Merced, I've worked with LEAP students on this project, gathering information from a variety of sources, from YouTube videos, documentaries, to interviews with farmers, to the more traditional database articles about what is this practice, why is it disappearing, and why is it important to sing to cows, whether you're in the Llanos or even potentially here in California.
And I came to talk to you actually about joining that project. That was like in the fall, and then starting my own through Professor Varnet. That was a thing where I just wanted to do the project. She wanted it, and we're just here out of thin air. So for students to know that both are possible.
Absolutely.
You just need to go and talk.
So yeah, if you already know, hey, these are my research interests, I'm sort of interested in the combination of philosophy and psychology. I don't necessarily see any professors who's doing that, but like I see from the website that maybe I should go talk to these professors. It's possible that you could design your own LEAP project one-on-one with a professor, and that they could be a mentor for you, and that you could get paid to do that research. It's also possible that as is the case with me, that maybe there's a professor. So I'll be switching my LEAP project for next year. So we may get a chance to talk about that later. It will be tied to my UROC project for the summer. So I sort of like to, as you know, but maybe not all our listeners will know, that during the summer we have sort of intense undergraduate research opportunities through UROC, and then we have year-long opportunities through LEAP. And so those are two similar opportunities. They're not mutually exclusive. People can apply to both. In my case, my projects are connected through both of those, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, and I'll just speak from like the student point of view, because
Absolutely.
Getting into UROC during the summer, which I'll be doing this summer, that it is a program that gets you ready for grad school, not just the research itself. And it is 2 months, so I believe it's like it's June through August. It's those days. And you will have the project, like you said, with a professor, whether you created that or not, or you join one. And then you will actually have like a graduate student as like also an advisor. So you'll be checking in with everybody, and you'll be doing also like group activities of learning how to put like an abstract together, CV, all of that. So it's a very nice wrapped up program for the summer. That's very, I haven't done it yet, but it looks like it's a very tightly wound, like very structured thing to do. And that LEAP is very not open, but less intense, because you have the full year to do all
Absolutely.
of that. So there's room to ebb and flow within the LEAP, whereas the summer is more like getting a project done because they want you to present at a conference, and they provide money for that. That's also a good thing. You get money for it, and it is a very nice chunk of money. As well as, I believe, books and other things. So.
And my first experience with UROC was last summer. So when I started at UC Merced, I was first a TA, and then I was a teaching fellow, and then as a lecturer, and so now I'm an assistant teaching professor. And it wasn't until I got to that rank of assistant teaching professor that I was actually allowed to host undergraduate research projects. So that's something to be aware of. We have really great instructors and lecturers on campus. They may not be eligible to lead some programs, like for UROC UROC and for LEAP. So just keep that in mind, that you can definitely talk with everyone, but it's probably going to be the certain groups of professors who are going to be eligible to do that. And that's but I knew when I was transitioning from a lecturer to a professor line, I said, hey, I want to get on UROC my first summer. And so I definitely had that same experience that you're imagining will happen in the summer. It is very structured. It is thinking about students who are thinking about maybe going to graduate school, even if you're unsure. It's a great way to get more resources for that, hands-on resources. And there is a research project as well. But then the LEAP, like you said, it can be a little bit more flexible. It's sort of like work study in a way that you're getting those. It's one of many things you're doing in a semester. I know my LEAP students also have other on-campus jobs. They have classes and finals and senior theses they're working on. So, but over the summer, UROC is considered your full-time job. So that's one reason it's so intense.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that it is stipulated that you don't have any job or anything else
Right.
for the summer and that you solely focus on that. But speaking to if you can't find somebody that is able to have that project, you will always learn from the person that you talk to what they know, and who they know could be a big wide net, because you led me to a book and then I gave a presentation to another professor that is outside of English Lit, that is anthropology, and now that helped me go in a slightly different way. So that's it's always good to talk to one person and then have another person. Okay, have you talked to this one? And then because everybody.
And it can seem intimidating, right, to some students to actually just go to a professor they've never met before. So I think that know that you can approach professors that you've had before. That's always can be hopefully an easier transition. But what you did, we hadn't met before. And that was the same with one of my UROC scholars over the summer, Ashley. She and I hadn't been in a class together, but she saw online that I was offering a UROC project. She was interested in learning more, and it turned out to be a great fit. And then I've been able to continue to be her mentor afterwards. So that's something to think about in terms of research as well. Of course, there's like the nitty-gritty research that you yourself will produce. It goes on your CV. It can help you with, next projects. But also, it's great to have a faculty mentor who can help you write letters of recommendation, for you down the road, who can help you if you are applying to jobs or grad schools, to help you look over your essays. So that's something that I definitely do with my students, is that if they're applying to grad school, hey, let's work on your personal statement together. And I think that's just that mentorship for me is really important in the research, that it's not just about the research. We bring our whole selves to the table when we're doing research, and that human aspect for me of mentoring is really important as well.
Yeah, and you need that because there's a lot of things that you're not told
Yes.
to get to graduate school if you want to go, such as
Absolutely.
personal statement, statement of purpose. You need letters of recommendation, usually several. Yes, and if you weren't ever told that.
Right.
Because I spoke to another professor and he was like, I just talking about college, and it was just nobody ever told me. They said I thought it just happened.
Right.
That it would just, that's just the way it goes. But it begins with just talking to your professors. Because I've never had a class with you.
Right.
Solely, I presented in talking about next about your writing to save the planet.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just, I've just been in their office hours and done other things and just out in the wild. So it doesn't have to be somebody that you have taken a class from. It can be literally anybody. That's why you just have to take that step and you might not. The easiest thing here, let me just preface, the easiest thing to do is always just email. Do you have office hours?
Yes.
That's the thing to add. Do you have office hours? And may I please come to those and talk to you about whatever idea, and then move forward. So
Absolutely.
maybe that will break the ice before, if anybody's like just afraid to just walk into an office.
Right.
You just send a cursory email out and see what bites, and there you go.
And those office hours, I know some professors on campus, we've been thinking about calling them student hours, actually renaming them, because that's really the time for any student, whether it's students we're already working with. I had someone connect with me a few days ago on LinkedIn, a PhD student here at UC Merced. We just hadn't connected yet, and he said, hey, can I come to your office hours? I want to talk about your LinkedIn profile. It sounds like you're doing some interesting things. And so I think as you get more confident, as you reach out to more people, you send those emails, you talk with professors, that can become easier. But that was my one, if I could give a recommendation to my former undergrad self, it would have been to go to more office hours, because we might seem scary or intimidating if we're up in front of the room. We have those, letters after our name, but we're just people, and we wouldn't be working here at UC Merced if we didn't want to help UC Merced students. So I agree that not even necessarily starting out with, hey, I want to do research with you, but just say, hey, I'd love to learn more about your research. Could I come? When are your office hours? Could I stop by? And I know professors, we get a lot of emails. I didn't realize until I was a professor myself that we have hundreds of emails every day. So never feel afraid to, ping that email back up and say, hey, I haven't heard from you, just checking in. That's actually a polite thing to do. I used to think that was rude, but if professors don't email you back, you can always email them back, a week or so later saying, hey, just checking in regarding this. And it's probably we just had 600 unread emails and it somehow got lost. So.
Yes, I just explained that to somebody in the URJ. Mm-hmm. They were asking, they didn't respond back to present in the class, and I said, how long has it been? And then you just sent another one. They just probably did not see it.
I used to think, my mentor is thinking about this, and she on purpose is not writing me back, and maybe she's upset about some presentation I give. And no, it's just we get a lot of emails.
Yeah, that's just a fear in one's own head about other people. But I would really like to talk about writing to save the planet, because not just in terms of always getting something out there that could be possible that would be in the URJ, but it is still research and it's still multifaceted in what you have your students do in terms of the different projects possible. If you could speak more to
absolutely. So writing to save the planet, the class is listed as English 130, and starting next year it will be co-listed as EH 130. So some people out there may not know that we actually have a new program in SHOS launching officially in the fall. It's called Environmental Humanities. I will be program director for that new program. It's a new major and minor on campus, and it will actually be the only minor we have in sustainability at UC Merced. So as part of that program, when we were designing it, we thought we really want to have a test case of what this is going to look like, because it's pretty innovative. It's the only program of its kind in the UC system, and it's combining all of those skills from the humanities about communication, creativity, storytelling with science and engineering. And so making sure that we're training the next generation of environmental communicators, because we all know we have big looming environmental problems. And yet, why is more not being done to change them? In my perspective, we have great science and engineering technology out there. The problem is we're not implementing that. And why is that? That's a people problem. And that's where training in the humanities, both for if you already have a major in STEM or you just want to get more involved in the sciences. And so we use Writing to Save the Planet as a sort of test case for the whole major to say, we think that these are the different types of topics we're going to be weaving together. So I've taught that class for a few springs in a row now. It's one of my favorite classes to teach. And it really weaves together writing skills and storytelling skills with different topics in environmental studies. And when I was designing the class, it was very important for me that the students themselves felt active as creators. So we're not just, watching videos or listening to podcasts, that the students will be creating them themselves. And so there are no traditional, even though it's an English class, will also be an EH class, no traditional essays, no traditional exams. The midterm students create an environmental comic based on one of the environmental topics that we've learned about, to sort of have in a visual form explaining the complex topic through both image and text. The final is a creative project, so students can choose whatever genre. I've had students do choreographies, spoken word, sculpture, you name it, I've had it, mosaics, but translating complex environmental topics through engaging media. And we also in that class do a podcast. I had never done a podcast until Writing to Save the Planet, and so it's a fun thing that it's a group assignment, and the students themselves actually create the rubric with me. So it's a collaborative rubric. And I say, what do you like in a podcast? And that because the students are the audience for the podcast, those are all on environmental justice themes. So, and we listen to them as a class. So the class is not only creating podcasts, but we're also listening and responding to the student podcasts throughout the semester.
Yeah. Sounds like that project there could very well bring a new person on to this project, because person off camera Shayla will have her own podcast that is still part of Insert Research here. But then somebody else could come in, because I will be done with this semester, because it will be the end of my 2 semesters. Yeah, it sounds like a real good thing for somebody else to keep it going.
And I've talked with students. I actually asked my students, how many of you guys have done a podcast before? And at least half of the class has done a podcast, either on their own or through other coursework. So yeah, if we have any listeners out there who've taken Writing to Save the Planet, love making that podcast, or if on your own or through another course you've done podcasting, Christopher's position could be a something to look into for LEAP for next year.
Yeah, because this is all about different narratives for how you come at research.
Absolutely.
Looking for more different perspectives rather than my own or Shayla's. I wanted to talk probably at the end more about how we came to this and how we started through Blue Lenses and just to walk through them there. But before that, just to get some others, what you have, the comparative literature, you have all that, and of course, level of language and the culture. Is there anything else that brought you specifically to, storytelling, animal studies? Can you, give me, a core memory?
That's a really good question. So, something about my family is we have, growing up, we always had a lot of books. And I'm an only child, and my dad, every evening he would read to me before going to bed, and he's a chemist by training. And so we had stories were an important part of our family. Even my mom's an economist, my dad's a chemist, and yet they really appreciate the humanities and storytelling. So I remember they have this vast library, and they would pick down a couple books when I was in junior high and high school, say, I think you might like some of these, classics literature. And then I would read the first, chapter of each and decide which one I was going to read. And so I think that knowing that literature was always there for me, maybe even as an only child, maybe it was particularly important for me that maybe books were in a way my a sort of sibling, but and it was also a way to travel. I now travel a lot for my research, but that was something that we just didn't have the ability to do. We weren't able to take these luxurious trips to Europe when I was in junior high or high school that I heard some students were able to do, but I wasn't able to travel internationally until I started getting research funds through my universities. And so that's one reason I went into comparative literature, was I wanted to be able to travel and to be able to get that funded, that travel funded. But I think stories, being in a household where we math was very important, music was very important, but I think that sort of connection with stories, I didn't think even as an undergrad that I would go into literature, and I initially was actually pre-med, and I tell my STEM students this, but I think that I just gravitated towards the creative writing classes. We had lots of great creative writing poetry classes, literature classes. And then I realized in my coursework as an undergrad that I always remember this one conversation I had at the cafeteria with one of my friends who was in my biology class, and she was so excited about the mitochondria. And I just wasn't that excited about the mitochondria. And so for me, it was more about bigger picture. I was interested in endangered species. How do endangered species, become endangered? These sort of bigger environmental issues. And I realized that here she was looking at the mitochondria being very zoomed in. I wanted to zoom out. And so that's where I sort of shifted on my STEM side to more sort of earth systems, environmental studies. And in those classes, I realized what set me apart from my peers were my communication skills, that I really liked writing. I had practice in writing. And so I think that I was always sort of the odd person out, maybe in my classes. In my STEM classes, I was the humanities girl. In my humanities classes, I was the STEM girl. And so I like being the person who can bridge those two worlds through environmental communication.
Okay. Right in the middle.
Yeah.
You spoke before about one of your programs that you just didn't quite like.
Yeah.
Were there any other, that's not really an obstacle, that's just more of a knowing, hey, I don't like this, let's move on to something else. Were there any other, obstacles that you can speak of, or for
Definitely.
Any developing people?
Yeah, so, and I can speak a little bit more of that experience in Boulder. So I was planning on living in Boulder, for the next 5 to 8 years when I moved out there. I, moved out there. My parents drove me out. We bought furniture. And it was a program that was a master's with the option to stay for a PhD. And I had a lot of people, so any of you guys who get in any of a similar situation, maybe this will be helpful. I was more than a semester in, and I was really unhappy. And I talked with people, and they just said, well, everyone hates their first year of grad school. And I thought, this doesn't feel right. I understand that maybe grad school is always challenging, it's different from undergrad, but I just felt sort of this intuition that it wasn't a good fit for me. And that was a really hard decision to make. And here I was sort of, I had been sort of traditionally successful in many ways, and to drop out of a grad program, that was a really hard step to take. And a lot of people told me not to do it. And a lot of people told me when I was an undergrad not to design my own major. Who's going to hire you if you design your own major? They're not going to know what that means. I'm confident that that's the only reason I'm a professor today, that I had that courage to say, no, I'm really working at the intersection between these two fields, and we don't have a major, or I couldn't even combine majors and minors to do what I wanted to do. And so I guess that's something I would say is trust that intuition that you have. It's not that it's going to be easy, but I look back at those moments that were very hard. So I was unemployed for a year. I moved back with my parents. I was being rejected for jobs, dog washing jobs. I used to work at a bike mechanic at a bike shop. They wouldn't hire me back. And I felt really bad about myself. And here I was, I just graduated from college, thought I was going to be successful. Then I dropped out of my grad program, and I felt very lost. And so know that when you look at your professors, you look at other people that you might look up to, many of us have had these twists and turns to our journey. And I had this pie in the sky idea, well, maybe I could go to grad school in Italy. But I didn't really think it was possible. But then I applied, and that, of all the things I was applied for, was what went through. And they said, well, you need to be here, get your plane ticket because we need you to be here in 2 weeks. And so in 2 weeks later, I was in Italy, and those were probably the 4 happiest years of my life that I was in Italy. That's where I met my partner. That's where I really fell in love with comparative literature. And being away from the United States, I really got to see who I was in a different culture and a different language. And that was so, so formative for me. And so I guess that one thing I would say is that listen to yourself. Of course, things are going to be hard. But if it really doesn't feel right, listen to that. And again, was it easy to drop out of grad school and then, not know where I was going to go? No, but I was able to get through that, and the happiness I had after was that much more. One other thing I'll say about hurdles, I think financial realities, we have to take those into consideration as students and researchers. And so there might be some great program that you could even get into, but what's the financial reality? And when I was applying to PhD programs in the US, I got into Berkeley, and I called them and I said, hey, this is your financial package. I'm looking at the cost of living in Berkeley. It's actually not enough to live in Berkeley. What do students do? And the staff person said, oh, well, I think they just take out loans. And I was horrified. I was so scared. I thought, I don't want to have to take out loans for grad school. And so I had to become very, in Italian, there's a word called furba, and they usually go with furba. I always think of it as like a fox. You have to be very sly and cunning, but in a good way. And so I had to be very furba to figure out before a couple of years ago, we had pay raises for our TAs, which has been really, really great to help them actually live a decent life as they are doing their graduate studies. But this was before that. And so I was on food stamps as a graduate student at Berkeley. I was living in low-income housing. And those are all things that take time. I was doing other jobs on the side. And so always those financial, that you might hear people not talk about it, but always for me when I'm mentoring my students, you have to think about how are you going to get food on the table as you're studying? Because how are you going to pay your rent, especially if you're in California? It's expensive. So I recommend that students only look for programs that are funded because that's just a reality. If you want to do good research, you have to have a place to sleep, have food to eat, have a place to study, and we can't take that for granted, unfortunately, in today's world.
Yeah, because we need the 3, 4. You need food, you need water, you need rest, and we can include a place that is safe.
Shelter.
Yeah, that is safe, shelter, that you don't have to, because that is the thing that you're going you're going to be focusing on your research and doing that.
Right.
And speaking about money, I have came across multiple spreadsheets that I have that list for like a master's, because not all master's programs are funded.
Absolutely.
But you really want one that is funded so that you're not taking out those loans. And from what I have read and researched, that in a PhD they give you so much for 5 years, 6 years, I believe is the timeline. And then you may have, well, most likely you will have to teach, but that's the whole thing of them paying you money. So you're paid that money to live, for a tuition waiver, and then a teaching load of however much. So there's a lot of factors, if I'm correct, that go into the whole thing. And that is why you need to have it funded and not be taking out 60, 70 grand for...
And so there's different ways you can navigate that. One thing that, obviously I'm biased because it's what I did, but master's programs abroad can cost a lot less money. Master's programs in Mexico, master's programs in Europe. But Sweden has a lot of free master's programs. And so if you get creative, think a little bit outside the box, there can be programs that cost a lot less or can even be free outside of the U.S. There are some, funded master's programs here in the U.S. Another option is to apply to a program that has the option for you to do teaching already as a master's student. That was the case for my Boulder experience. I was working through their program in writing and rhetoric as an instructor while I was in my environmental studies program. And so there are creative solutions out there, but sometimes people try to go straight for the PhD knowing that that will be funded. It's hard then because it's really competitive to get out in a PhD program anyway, let alone straight out of undergrad. So I usually recommend that people do something in between unless they have a really unusual resume. But yeah, it's always real. Where's the money?
I would like to talk about how, as an example to other students, of how I came in and started talking to you about a short story because I want to write a paper to get into the honors program. And that was just me coming into the office and saying, hey, I have this, and I actually had another paper, and you had read the book before but weren't familiar with it, but then you asked actually to read the short story that I read. It's Blue Lenses, and you read it, and then now I need to do the whole thing, but you suggested for me to do like an annotated bibliography, to go and do all of that research. Not to just say like what we're doing, but maybe explain like the beginning steps in a more academic way of like how I came to you and put it all together rather than me just saying, oh, I talked you into this. And like if somebody did come at you like with a project like I did, what could you explain the next steps?
Absolutely.
That would go on.
Yeah, so projects can take lots of forms. We've talked about LEAP and UROC, but sometimes it comes from a student's personal interest. Maybe it's out of a class that they took. They wrote an essay. They want to do something. Maybe they want to submit that essay to URJ, but they don't know how to take it to the next level. Maybe it's just some short story that's, since I do work in literature, students come to me to talk about literature they've read. So some short story that's on their mind. They know that there's something there and they'd like to explore it more. So, and again, another reason to call it student hours. These hours are for you guys to come talk with us about whatever issues it is. Even just like, hey, I just read this book. I'd like to talk with the professor about. That's totally a great reason to come to office hours. So I think in your case, one was figuring out what texts you were most interested in working on, right? So we were first talking about, how do you pronounce it? Annihilation.
That's
the thing when you speak more languages. I'm like, how do you pronounce that in English? Annihilation. Which I think had a lot of rich places you could go. But then we started talking about this short story, which I was really interested in since it connected with my research in animal studies. So thinking about, it's funny how in the humanities we often think that humans are not animals, but we biologically are animals. So I'm particularly interested in the human, non-human, and how does that get depicted in literature? And so I think that if you have the opportunity to work with a text that a professor already knows, or maybe it's a text you read in one of their classes, or maybe it's a text that the professor is open to read, like a short story, to then say, okay, so what interests you about this story, right? Because I think that's one great thing about literature. Every great text can be interpreted in lots of different ways. You could write 1,000 different essays about the same short story. And so to figure out as a researcher, where do your interests lie? Is it more in how this short story fits into their oeuvre more generally as a writer? Are you interested in, well, they're part of this subgenre of literature of the Gothic, and I want to see how it sort of subverts the Gothic trends? Or in our case, it seemed that you were interested in the animals that were surfacing in the text, that some were more domestic animals and some were more of the traditional wild animal. And you had this question, why is that? So I don't think we've actually talked about this, but in one of my classes, I have a sort of brainstorming activity to come up with creative thesis statement ideas. So I think one hard thing for students when they're in a classroom setting, often you want to get an A, right? You want to do well in the class, and you write the paper that you think the professor wants to read instead of the paper that you yourself want to write. And so in my classrooms, I try to, shift that and say, no, I'm actually interested in reading what you're interested in researching about. And so I think that there are ways, and if anyone wants to come to office hours and chat about them, there are ways to figure out, to narrow down what are the places you want to go with a text. And so then it goes to library research usually, and we have great resources at our library for finding articles, short stories, bibliography, materials. So it always starts with reading, and then it goes back to more reading to figure out. And I think there are some articles that I sent you that were more interesting and more relevant for you than others, right? And to say, well, I'm more interested in this article, and then I can help you find other articles like that, or our librarians can help you more. So I think it's, we have a great librarian who recently came to UC Merced. Her name is Bronwyn, and she came to my LEAP group, and she was talking about research. And she says for her, research is always an iterative process, right? So there are many different steps. You could number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you're always moving around in that circle. And so you're researching, and then you need to read, and then you go back and you need to research more to find those gaps in the knowledge. And so part of it is narrowing down. I guess that for me, it's always important to narrow down a research topic to something specific. And so for us, it happened to be, at least the last time we talked about it, maybe it has changed since now, thinking about, okay, it's not the main part of the story that animals are an important part. But if you were summarizing the story, you might not clarify that some animals are domesticated and some are not. But yet you were interested in this, specific detail that for some reason you thought there's something there. And so I guess to have students trust their instincts and say, if you think there's something there, there probably is. And so then working with a professor, mentor, other student, maybe even a librarian to dig deeper, find more resources to help you better understand.
Most definitely, because even finding like one small detail and focusing on one detail, that is the major point. But you will find that other people usually have been there before, maybe not in quite the same way that you want to talk about. As an example here, there's a lot of feminism from the male gaze onto her, and that works into the animal dynamic of also the Gothic works in there. My viewpoint was more of those animals being domestic and wild, while she also bases her identity off of, to spoil the story, more of like a female deer, a doe to be specific, and that like it took on her actual identity. But that also weaves back into feminism and the Gothic. Those are very much those tropes of that. So there's a lot, like you said, it's an entire circle that goes back and back. I would say hermeneutic circle more, and that you do that. And I think a great point that you made is that it is all about reading and reading again. Never think that you've read something once and that's the end of it. You need to want to know what the thing is about and then start the circle again. And then, of course, break the circle and start branching out. But the beginnings is you reading something. And that's why I wanted to bring up this, because you were so kind to actually ask for a copy and then read it and then
keep it for months and not give it back to you.
No, that's fine.
I gave the book back to Christopher today.
I have a whole library of other things that I go off and.
That's the problem. If you lend a book to a professor, they may keep it for a while. So keep that in mind as well. But
maybe not repeat the same mistake twice, but gladly I will. But yeah, that is not just also the professors, it's the librarians that's what they have their
Librarians are
degree
a great
in,
resource we
in
have.
searching all of those different databases that are available.
And it's not just for literature. So there are resources for all different, classes, all different departments. So if you're an engineer and you have to do an engineering project that requires research, we have librarians who specialize in that. And so sometimes I think we categorize, okay, library goes with the humanities, but that's actually not the case. We have a lot of great resources, no matter what your major is. And there are librarians there too. You can have one-on-one appointments. You're totally allowed to do this for your classes, is have one-on-one appointments with librarians, and they can help you with your research. And so I'm really grateful to them for helping me and also helping my students with their research.
Yeah, just like Late and Surrey or UROG, there were so many different things. And speaking to like all the different databases, from because you can access the library from home through a VPN, and then I came to you and I was like, we don't have the OED, and it was more of a thing of just not working at my home maybe that day, but we most definitely do. And then I was able to look up several things that because beyond just a cursory like Google search, you're not gonna get to the root of like the word thing, or in French, chose. So you need all of those databases, especially there is JSTOR, there is Google Scholar, but you need the library and librarians to run down academic journals
and that's something
else
that I would recommend that people take advantage while they're here, because once you graduate, you don't necessarily have access to those articles anymore. And so I had, when I was at Berkeley, I had friends from Italy who they would ask me to find specific articles, even science articles they needed for their research. They just didn't have access to them at other institutions in other countries. And so we're really, really lucky to have the great library resources that we have, because not all universities have them. And so yeah, learn to use them, and they'll be your friends for life.
That's another thing, is being able to request books from
Interlibrary loan.
Yeah, from another place that students might not know that you can do. You just search and
pretty much any book in the world you want that's ever been published, the library can try to get for you. So So I'm working on, I can just tell briefly maybe about my UROC project for this summer, if anyone, is listening and is still looking for a UROC project. So Karina Sáenz Borgo, she is a Venezuelan author who lives in Spain. She recently wrote a book, La Hija Española, and is translated into English, It Would Be Night in Caracas. So very different titles. The Spanish Daughter, or It Would Be Night in Caracas. And it's a fictional story told in first person. And it traces a young woman's life as she navigates the authoritarian regime in Venezuela, and lots of elements of politics and philosophy and economics. Very rich novel, and so I'm particularly interested in that book, because usually it's not until an authoritarian regime falls that we get a sort of upsurge of literature about it after the fact. But I think it's really brave. What she did was to publish something while that regime is still in power. And so we're going to be looking at the aspects of her novel. It's been very popular, translated into lots of languages, because you sort of hear about Venezuela in the news. It's like something's going on. A lot of people are immigrating, but people don't really know what's going on. And so I think it's actually a responsibility we have in the humanities to tell stories about important social justice issues, such as the exodus of millions of Venezuelans from their country. And so to look at while her novel is quite popular, not a lot of literary criticism has yet been written about it because it's so new. And so I'm hoping that with my students over the summer, we can work both in the original Spanish and in the English translation, and students can sort of pick their own entryway into the text, whether it's philosophical, whether it's political, whether it's literary. So I'm really excited about that. I also will be sharing with them excerpts from a novel that I am actually writing. So in addition to research, I do creative work as well. And so that's me being vulnerable, sharing my unpublished writing with my students, but it's also a novel about what's happening in Venezuela. So similar to Borgo, I'm working through how do you write about authoritarian regimes as they're happening. And it's scary to do that. And it's scary when not all of the information, if you Google about a country, is correct. Right, and so to figure out how to tell stories about that, those important issues, and hopefully to find a way to get those stories out to the world as well.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
If I didn't have my own project, I would most definitely think about that. But it's so great that there's not been a lot already done, so it's very wide open field too. So nobody feels the pressure of somebody, because I always feel the pressure of somebody's been there before.
Oh yeah, my projects are always like, we're having a hard time finding any scholarly articles written on it. And I tell my students, that's the real research, right? Is and they're saying, well, I'm not finding any articles about the topic. I was like, because we're going to write the article about the topic that will be cited later. And so there's different types of research, but I always like to be that really pushing the envelope. What's really, really new and hasn't been done before? Yeah. I guess it's maybe being a daughter of a chemist. You know, you imagine in the lab you're making something and creating something. That's what we get to do for me as researchers. That's what I love, and I keep coming back to is you're really an innovator, and your laboratory, in my case, is books. But if it had all been said before, I'd be out of a job. And so the fun thing is it hasn't actually all been said before.
Oh, yeah. But it is fun to be there. Because to me, that is what research really is it is your thinking. No matter, you have all of these other journals, well, that's what they think. Where is your argument from all of these together? So even if you think, oh, they've both said it before, like you said, you'd be out of a job. But you have not said what you have to say about
right,
it.
and the students haven't said it, right, that you haven't interacted with and I'm always learning from my students new perspectives on text, that I read a story differently after having read a student's essay that's like, I never paid attention to that detail before, and now I realize it's actually really important. So that's another important thing for me is with the research is we all learn together.
Yeah, and that is why we have this podcast and so many different narrative viewpoints and ways in, and I believe this will be the end. Thank you so much for
Thank you, Christopher, for having
joining me today. And this is Insert Research Here.